In a world where violence shocks our communities almost every day, two chilling cases, a stabbing rampage in a Michigan Walmart and the cold-blooded assassination of a Minnesota lawmaker, raise a burning question. Why is one labeled terrorism while the other escapes that charge? Today, we dive into the details, motives, and politics behind these crimes, exploring whether justice is blind or if a Republican administration might be shading the scales when a Democrat is the victim. Welcome to another installment of Back Porch Files from your neighbor on the left, the podcast about liberal politics, human decency, and life on the blue side of America's ideological divide. My name is Don Spielis, your faithful host. Today we're tackling a topic that's gripping and divisive: the inconsistent application of terrorism charges in two recent high-profile violent crimes. In Michigan, a man arrested for a stabbing spree in a Walmart faces terrorism charges, signaling a clear intent to brand his actions as a threat to public safety. In Minnesota, a gunman who meticulously planned and executed the murder of a Democratic state representative and her husband while wounding another lawmaker faces murder and stalking charges, but not terrorism. Why the difference? Is it about the crimes themselves, the motives, or something deeper, like the political affiliation of the victims under a Republican-led federal government? Let's break it down, starting with the cases themselves. On July 22nd, a quiet shopping day at a Walmart in Flint, Michigan, turned into a nightmare. A 29-year-old man, whose identity we'll refer to as John Doe due to ongoing legal proceedings, allegedly stormed the store with a knife, stabbing multiple shoppers in a chaotic attack. According to reports from MLive and other local sources, the suspect injured several people before being subdued by police. The Genesee County Prosecutor's Office swiftly announced charges including assault with intent to murder and, notably, domestic terrorism under Michigan's Anti-Terrorism Act. Why terrorism? Prosecutors pointed to evidence suggesting the attack was meant to intimidate or coerce the public, possibly driven by ideological motives, though specifics remain under wraps due to the ongoing investigation. What makes this case stand out is the speed and certainty with which the terrorism label was applied. Michigan's Anti-Terrorism Act defines terrorism as an act intended to intimidate or coerce a civilian population or influence governmental policy through fear. The suspect's actions, targeting random shoppers in a public space, seems to fit this framework, signaling a broader intent beyond personal grievance. Some reports hint at a manifesto or social media posts that may have revealed extremist views, though authorities haven't fully disclosed the motive. This case sets a benchmark, a public violent act with apparent ideological underpinnings labeled as terrorism. Keep that in mind as we shift to Minnesota, where a very different story unfolded. On June 14th, 2025, Minnesota was rocked by a brazen attack that left the state reeling. Vance Luther Bolter, a 57-year-old security contractor and self-described religious missionary, allegedly carried out a meticulously planned assault on two Democratic lawmakers. State Representative Melissa Hortman, the former Speaker of the Minnesota House, and her husband, Mark, were shot dead in their Brooklyn Park home. Just miles away, State Senator John Hoffman and his wife, Yvette, were critically wounded but survived. Bolter, disguised as a police officer complete with a tactical vest, silicone mask, and a fake police SUV, targeted at least two other lawmakers that night, only thwarted by one being on vacation and the police intervention at another's home. Bolter faces 6 federal charges: 2 counts of murder with the firearm, 2 counts of stalking, and 2 firearms offenses, carrying the possibility of life imprisonment or even the death penalty. On the state level, he's charged with 2 counts of second-degree murder and 2 counts of attempted second-degree murder. Authorities found a hit list in his vehicle naming 45 Democratic officials, including Governor Tim Walz and U.S. Representative Ilhan Omar, alongside pro-choice advocates. Governor Walz called it a politically motivated assassination, and acting U.S. Attorney Joseph Thompson labeled it a chilling attack on democracy. Yet, despite the clear political targeting and premeditation, no terrorism charges have been filed. Why? Let's explore the legal and political angles that might explain this disparity. To understand why one case is called terrorism and the other isn't, we need to look first at how terrorism is defined. Under federal law, domestic terrorism involves acts dangerous to human life that violate criminal laws and are intended to intimidate or coerce a civilian population, influence government policy, or affect government conduct through mass destruction, assassination, or kidnapping. Michigan's state law mirrors this, emphasizing intent to instill fear or disrupt public order. The Walmart stabbing fits this mold, a random public attack meant to terrorize shoppers. But the Minnesota case, despite its political motives and hit list, isn't getting the terrorism label. One possibility could be the nature of the target. The Michigan attack struck random civilians in a public space, aligning with the classic terrorism definitions that emphasize broad societal fear. In Minnesota, Bolter's targets were specific: elected officials and their families, suggesting a targeted assassination rather than a mass terror event. Federal prosecutors may see murder and stalking charges as sufficient to address the crime's severity, especially since murder with the firearm carries the death penalty. But this raises questions. Does a politically motivated assassination of elected officials not qualify as an attack on democracy itself? Could the choice of charges reflect prosecutorial strategy or something more systemic? Let's dig into some of those theories. Theory 1. Prosecutorial strategy and legal fit. Prosecutors often choose charges based on what's easiest to prove. In the Michigan case, the public nature of the attack and potential extremist manifesto make terrorism charges a clear fit under state law. In Minnesota, the U.S. Attorney's Office may have opted for murder and stalking charges because they're straightforward and carry severe penalties. The federal murder charges against Bolter could lead to the death penalty, a punishment as serious as any terrorism charge. Plus, proving terrorism requires clear evidence of intent to intimidate a broader population, which might be harder when the targets are specific individuals, even if they're public officials. Theory 2. Nature of the targets. The Walmart stabbing targeted random civilians, creating widespread fear in a public setting, a hallmark of terrorism. Bolter's attacks, while chilling, were surgically precise, aimed at specific Democratic lawmakers. This specificity might lead prosecutors to classify it as an assassination rather than terrorism, even though the hit list and political motives suggest a broader intent to disrupt democratic processes. The distinction feels semantic when you consider the ripple effects. The murder of a lawmaker shakes public trust in governance just as much as a public attack. And Theory 3. Political bias under a Republican administration. Now let's address the elephant in the room: politics. It's 2025 and the federal government is under Republican control, with President Donald Trump in office. The Minnesota victims, Melissa Hortman and John Hoffman, were prominent Democrats, and Bolter's hit list exclusively targeted Democrats and pro-choice advocates. Some speculate that a Republican-led Justice Department might be less inclined to label an attack on Democratic officials as terrorism especially if the perpetrator's motives align with conservative ideologies. Bolter's roommate and friends describe him as a Trump supporter with strong anti-abortion views, and his sermons rallied against abortion and LGBTQ+ rights. Could this political alignment influence the choice of charges? On the flip side, the Justice Department's decision might be purely legal, not political. Terrorism charges don't always add harsher penalties than murder, and prosecutors may prioritize charges that ensure conviction. But the optics are hard to ignore. If the victims were Republicans and the shooter a left-leaning extremist, would the terrorism label have been applied more readily? Critics argue that the Republican administration's rhetoric, often critical of Democratic figures, could subtly shape prosecutorial priorities, consciously or not. To put these cases in perspective, let's look at some headline-grabbing acts of violence from the past 20 years. The 2013 Boston Marathon bombing by the Tsarnaev brothers, which killed 3 and injured hundreds, led to federal terrorism charges reflecting its indiscriminate public targeting. Similarly, in 2015, the San Bernardino shooting, where a couple killed 14 at a workplace event, was prosecuted as terrorism due to its ideological motives. But the 2017 Las Vegas shooting by Stephen Paddock, which left 60 dead, carried no terrorism charges, as no clear ideological intent was established, only murder and weapons offenses. And of course, the 2021 Capitol riot saw many charged with seditious conspiracy, but only a few faced specific domestic terrorism enhancements. These cases show how terrorism charges hinge on motive and intent, often leaving room for debate when politics or unclear ideologies muddy the waters. And of course, let's not forget that in the spring of 2025, when protests resulted in the damage of many Tesla dealerships and Tesla vehicles, that the administration threatened to charge anybody caught doing so with terrorism. Theory 4. Public perception and media influence. Another factor is how these cases are framed in the public eye. The Michigan stabbing, with its random victims, fits the public's image of terrorism, chaotic, indiscriminate violence. The Minnesota case, while shocking, might be seen as a political vendetta, less likely to be labeled terrorism by media or public opinion. The perception could influence prosecutors, who operate in a world where public and political pressures matter. Misinformation also muddies the waters. Right-wing commentators falsely claim Bolter was a leftist, which might complicate the narrative around labeling his actions as terrorism. Theories notwithstanding, these cases highlight a troubling rise in political violence in the U.S. from the 2022 attack on Nancy Pelosi's husband to the 2024 assassination attempt on Trump. The nation is grappling with the surge in ideologically driven attacks. The Minnesota case, in particular, underscores the vulnerability of state-level officials, who often lack the security of their federal counterparts. The absence of terrorism charges in Minnesota raises questions about consistency in our legal system. If a politically motivated assassination isn't terrorism, what is? And does the political climate, especially under a Republican administration, shape how we define and prosecute these acts? The disparity also fuels distrust. If the public perceives that charges are influenced by the victim's party or the perpetrator's ideology, it erodes faith in justice, a faith that's being tested daily these days. As we move forward, we need clearer standards for what constitutes terrorism, especially when elected officials are targeted. Otherwise, we risk normalizing political violence as just another crime. The Michigan Walmart stabbings and the Minnesota lawmaker shootings show us how the same legal system can treat similar acts of violence very differently. Is it about legal strategy, the nature of the crime, or the shadow of politics? We've explored the theories, but the answers aren't clear-cut. What do you think? Should Bolter face terrorism charges, or are murder charges enough? I'd love to hear from anyone listening to the podcast. You can drop an email at neighborotleftpodcast@gmail.com, or you can reach out to the podcast on any of our social media platforms. All of those links are listed on our Linktree page, and the Linktree URL is in the podcast description. Please drop your thoughts. Let me know what you think about this and any other thoughts you might have on the podcast, this episode, or any other. If you've enjoyed this episode, please leave a review, subscribe to the podcast, and be sure to join me next week. On Tuesday, as always, we'll have another full episode with a deep dive as well as some hot topics from recent headlines. In the meantime, once again, I'm Don Spielis. This is Back Porch Files from your neighbor on the left. Until next time, stay curious, stay safe, and as always, have the week you voted for.